So I have a long list of questions. Thanks to everyone who submitted those. And I'm going to go through them. If you have any questions that pop up, please drop them in the chat box. Know that your peer mentors are always standing by too, so you can always add those to your student groups and we will make sure we get those answers. Okay, so the first question, it's a long one, so we've got a couple parts for this, but is about declining certain treatments, especially with the newborn assessment. So the question was surrounding the eye ointment, but really this can be expanded into anything, including like declining a bath at the hospital or birth center. So the question was about birthing people and having CPS called, or Child Protective Services, or whatever it is in the country that you are practicing in. And it's talking about apprehension when you decline certain procedures. So this is something that we talk about in our programs, and it's a really, really good question. And we wanted to first start with the question was surrounding like, how do our clients protect themselves? What are the legalities around this? What do we do in these situations? And a lot of it is going to be kind of a preparation ahead of time for you with your practice. So when we're talking about resources or prevention or ensuring our clients are prepared, I mean, really a lot of these issues are rooted in racism, homophobia, classism, ableism, fat phobia in medicine. Like, it's really about bias and oppression in healthcare. So there isn't a super easy answer to this, but the fact that it is happening is rooted in this oppression in the system of medical care, and harm essentially coming to equity-seeking groups. So let's look at the case of Mila Jackson. So that was a baby born earlier this year in Texas. And the parents had the child apprehended because they declined care for jaundice. But what happened was the Jackson family birthed at home. The hospital recommended a certain treatment, and so there wasn't actually a declining of care. They chose to stay with their primary care provider, who was a midwife, and they did follow the steps. But the hospital flagged it because they wanted the baby to go through the process through the hospital rather than through the care of the midwife. You can find out more details about that. I mean, the media will skew it all over the place, but really that was not a declining of care in the way that people might say, I don't want erythromycin or the vitamin K shot. And this family had their child taken, and they then spent those like really important time, that important window that should be about, you know, bonding and healing and rest, actually fighting to get their child back. And so, you know, after proving that they were safe and good parents, they did get their child back. But I mean, this is a perfect example because they didn't decline anything. They actually had a full care for baby Mila, and their midwife was overseeing that. So there's a lot of rumors around, not rumors, but like the conversation is first racism in this case, and then going into like kind of the punishment around birthing outside the system, which home birth is not birthing outside the system. It's very much part of the system when we're talking about within North America. And so Miss Charlotte and I discussed this at length last week for our MSP class, but anybody in previous cohorts, we do have a talk about racism and bias in reproductive health. And this, reproductive justice comes forward from this concept. And so there are agencies that do support families. You know, Sister Song is one. The FIA Center is another. That's one in Texas who actually supported the Jackson family. So really the preparation for your practice is knowing what is available for equity-seeking groups. So there are lots and lots of nonprofits. There's charities. There's advocacy groups that can support you. So if you are working with equity-seeking groups, or people who are marginalized by our medical system, this is a great place to ensure that you, as a care provider, as a doula, birthwork, whatever you're doing within this field, that you know who you can call upon if these things happen. Because, you know, there might be one case that feels a little more cut and dry of somebody, say, declining something that is optional, but they are also marginalized by the system. But, you know, in the case of Mila Jackson, they actually didn't decline care. They were going forward with a care process for that's recommended for jaundice. They just were doing it at home. And so this is why you being prepared for anything coming is really, really important. Again, you can search, Instagram has a really great, with places to go look. find out, search the web and find out what's available, so that if you are serving these families, you have this kind of like arsenal prepared to say, like, if there's an incident, this is the step one, this is step two, this is step three. And it's, it's unbelievable that we have to be prepared to, stand behind our parenting decisions. But the reality is, it's the case for, queer families, racialized families, families who might be dealing with visible or invisible disabilities. Like, I've had clients have issues just for declining the bath, and they have to sign forms saying that they're declining the care to have the baby bathed at the hospital. And there's like run into those kind of those barriers, because I exclusively serve equity seeking groups. So do that work ahead of time, so that as soon as this happens, this is the first call, this is the second call. And that's the best that we can do for our clients, until essentially we get oppression out of the medical system, that we as birth workers have to kind of create those nests to prepare them. So that's our first question. The next one, we're going to pivot a little bit into business. And the question was, I'm trying to write an about me page for a local doula group. And they'd heard that I did a lecture. I did. I'm going to share it with you. So if you, in the strategies and support for doulas in business, highly recommend you go join that group. It's free. It's hosted by us, but there's, it's across disciplines. So you get to really hang out with 8 or 9,000 other birth workers that we have in that group. So if you go over to strategies and support for doulas in business, you can search this quote, August challenge is a killer about you page. And you're going to see a lecture that Meg and I did, as well as all the like documentation to support you in that. So that's strategies and support. If you guys want to just use the chat box right now and let me know if you want us to run the website challenge again, because we did 5 months of website support going through each page that is really important to optimize. And so the About Us page was one of that. Okay, next question is about risk. So the question is, it was part of a longer question, but the excerpt is essentially, there's been a trend of people in their last trimester before labor having high blood pressure. And they're not saying it like crisis call an ambulance, but they're recommending an induction, and you need to head over to the hospital after this appointment. And then they get there, the Bishop score isn't ideal. They start the induction, and essentially that cascade of intervention happens, ending in a medical emergency, or, operative birth, or rushed birth, or like highly medicalized when that wasn't the plan. So what do we do? What do we do with our clients? How do we support people who might be flagged with this like high blood pressure, let's get things going? So this is a really great question. And as I say, this is a risk question. And so blood pressure can be a sign for other issues. Obviously, it's one of the criteria that we'd look at as preeclampsia, eclampsia. And so it as a standalone issue may not be anything. It also would require probably multiple tests at different times. There's some natural ways that we can lower our blood pressure. So if this is the case, giving folks the opportunity to, see what they can do about their blood pressure at home. Another one of the pieces that is a really great question for your client to ask is this high blood pressure compared to my previous blood pressure, or is this high for just somebody standalone? Because obviously there's a range of what would be normal relative for that person in earlier stages or earlier appointments. And so when we talk about risk, there's the absolute versus the relative risk. Now, if your client has had like a really long fertility journey and they're feeling really stressed and anxious and they don't want to, do anything to harm the baby, or, they're very risk averse, then this path might feel really good for them, because the anxiety of potentially doing something that is against what their doctors recommended doesn't feel good to them. So if your client is like, no, this feels fine. I'm going to listen. I'm fine getting induced. No, it wasn't my plan, but this feels like it feels really good in my body to just continue on with these recommendations, then you support that. But if your client's like, this is devastating, I don't understand, I don't want an operative birth, this was, they had a different plan. So then we have to start supporting them in getting through, talking to their doctor and really asking those questions. Like, is this an emergency? If this isn't like, getting rushed in, if there was no protein in the urine, if there's no other symptoms like headache, nausea, upper gastric pain, like these other things that we would see with a more urgent situation, then it probably means we have that window. But it depends on the types of questions that you support your clients in asking their healthcare provider. So when we look at this absolute versus relative risk, we know that there's a risk associated with induction with a low Bishop score or a poor Bishop score. And so, if we have a long, hard closed cervix that's still posterior and there's been no signs of labor, obviously starting into induction more often than not would lead to high interventions and a lot of medicalization for that labor. And so what we want to do is say like, okay, so we know this is going to happen because we have the stats on that. But we don't know if this is anything with the just high blood pressure as a standalone issue. And so a lot of times with our medical, like most of the issues with our medical system right now for reproductive health is that there's this constant risk aversion. So they're like, oh, high blood pressure, let's get induced. Oh, this, ultrasound, the baby's measuring a little bit big, let's jump on this. And so they're doing all of these things to like avoid shoulder dystocia, to avoid, all the other things that can come with preeclampsia and eclampsia. And so leading to potentially toxemia, any of these kinds of issues. And so, but when we stack up all these avoidance of potential risks, we are walking our clients into, we're not, the medical system is walking our clients into guaranteed risks. Like we know with all of these, if it's not a favorable cervix to start inducing, we know the likelihood of an operative birth is very high. And so helping your clients navigate through that and getting really clear, your doctor is going to be risk averse all over the place, but ironically, it's leading to more harm. Hence, we have the worst outcomes ever in modern history for reproductive health. So this is where we really want to have your clients like trust their intuition and get comfortable with, all of the choices are going to have consequences, and consequences don't always mean poor outcomes, but that they are very informed on which path feels the best for them. And so if you are seeing a trend with the client you're working with, the student who asked this question, find out what the hospital stats are right now, find out if they're with the same care provider, ask around so you can do that legwork to support your clients and see kind of what the birth climate is. And so that you can also factor that in just to say, just so you let you know, this hospital has the highest induction rate. So that's like an important piece of information so that they can kind of separate that this is a birth culture versus this is something about me specifically and the health of my baby. Obviously, whatever our client's gut check is, even if it is rooted in fear, then we have to create the most positive, amazing, supportive, celebratory birth that we can, because we can't always, even though it can feel frustrating sometimes when they're being medically coerced, instead we can buffer to be like, then this is the choice we're going to make. If this feels really good, I'll be there. Let's ensure we mitigate the risks around this, or you just keep that to yourself and you just do a lot of that support through movement, oral hydration, like all these other things that we can try to minimize some of the other likely interventions. But it's a really good question. And birth kind of goes in these trends where you're like, oh, it feels like everybody's getting an episiotomy again. Everybody's getting induced again. Everybody's scared about this again. And so that you can help them navigate through that absolute risk versus relative risk. Okay, great questions, you guys. There was like a huge sheet of them. Okay, the next one is the scenario, this doula is running into issues where the birthing person has ideas of what they want their birth/parenting journey to look like, and they're not sure how to bring it up to their partner, or there is a misalignment between the parents or the parents to be. And so one of the examples was The birthing person did not want to breastfeed, and knowing that the choices, the pros and cons of it are, but they didn't want to tell their partner this. Okay, so doulas, raise your hands if you've run into issues where the parents don't agree. It's a pretty major one. I've witnessed, wildly uncomfortable situations where one person is really clear why they want something, or just that they want something, and the other person doesn't, or they haven't even told the other person because they know their partner's, they believe they know their partner's assessment of what they would want. So parents being on the same page, whether it's two or more folks, is really, really important. Not only does it make parenting easier when you have an agreement or a plan that you've created together, but it also doesn't leave this like gaping hole for blame to come into the situation. Because again, there's pros and cons, there's consequences for every decision that we make. And if one person is like, yeah, I want to do this, and the other person says no, and something happens, obviously now we have not an alignment to support through the consequence, but rather this infighting that's happening with the parents. So this is a tool that I use with my clients, is I ask them to first understand each other. So getting to know why each person wants this thing is where I start with them. And we actually write this down because it's really helpful to see a visual and not just have it be like talking. So I always offer to support in like helping them hear one another. So the tool looks like this. Let's use the example that this doula has written in, and it was about the birthing person did not want to breastfeed, and they hadn't even told their partner yet because they know their partner does expect the baby to be nursed. This one has a little caveat because anytime it's about my body, my choice, that trumps everything. But we'll like work this one out so that they can at least understand each other. So I ask, why do you want to not breastfeed? And then we hear, and there's no judgment of it, and you just make a list. I don't want to be dependent on the baby. I'm a survivor. I think it's gross. I don't want my breasts to look a certain way, like whatever the list is, and there's no judgment. And they make that list. And then the other person lists their things. Now, I haven't seen a lot going this way, but I do have in the hetero context things like the dad doesn't want them to breastfeed. And sometimes it's like, I don't know, that's a weird blending of sexualization of the breast and seeing it as a source of food. So like if the situation was flipped, it would be that. And so I'd be like, okay, great. So you want these to be something that's, sacred in your sexual life with you and your partner, and you kind of hear them out. And then you look at, what are the goals that you both want to have? And there might be like, we both want free time. We both want to be able to leave the house. We want our baby to be healthful. Going down this list. And then you can actually see and hear each other, so your clients, to see like, oh, I didn't know that's why. Or somebody might have a trauma that they bring forward. And then this is like just to get the conversation started. I highly recommend that you also support that they see a therapist that can help them through, because if they're already running into conflict before the baby comes, it's not going to get any easier. And so, the fuses get shorter in the postpartum, the stakes get higher, the baby's here. So like teaching them how they can navigate through those situations. So one of them, like I'll use a hypothetical. If my partner and I don't have a uterus, so, and Haley doesn't want more babies, so it's a moot point. But we always do this, like, if we were parents game, which I'm kind of glad we chose not to birth a baby together, because we don't agree on very many things, because I believe in like really gentle practices, and Haley just doesn't share those beliefs as a hypothetical situation. And so I have to hear. So for example, I would say like the family bed is something really important. And then Haley says, I'm scared I'm going to roll over and crush the baby. I'm scared they're not going to be independent. And once we have that down, I'm like, oh, I see why you'd be scared about that. Do you want some information? But when I was first just like being like, what? You want the baby in the crib from day one? And she'd be like, yeah, and what, you want to do this weird hippie thing? And like right away, we can't hear each other. But as soon as I heard why she'd want that, I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. What about if it was like this? And we actually landed, again, it's a hypothetical baby that's not coming. But once we landed in a place, I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. Here's the solution. She was like, oh, well, that feels great. And then we landed in like baby on a surface next to the bed. And that was that. And again, until you're actually there, you don't know how you're going to feel about it. But I know I felt like so charged. Like it's really hard for parents because like even in our hypothetical baby situation, I'd feel like real upset. Like, what are you doing to this baby? And it's not even here. And so, understanding each other is something that a tool that a doula can navigate through. Anything more complex or when they start exploring some of those traumas potentially, if that's what they want to surface, that's where you definitely need to consult with a family therapist. So have that ready for you. Like have a few options that you can recommend, both like free or people who do pay what you can, as well as standard rate therapists, so that you have those resources available for your clients. But getting your clients on the same page, like they have to be on the same page because they're a team and they're going to have to deal with the good and the bad that comes with every one of their choices. But I do want to circle back. If there is something that is, like, for example, we know the benefits of human milk, but if the person who would be responsible for providing that human milk does not want to do it, then it stops there. Like, they can hear each other out and then they can make a plan to potentially get donor human milk if human milk is like the most important outcome, like the goal of that. But if somebody's like, I don't want to feed from my body, which is the original question, they don't have to feed from their body. Just like if they don't want to birth in a certain place or they don't want to do that procedure, they actually get to, as far as the relationship with them and their partner. But any of the needs of the baby, they do need to make together. Okay. Next question. One of the concepts that we use in our program, so anybody who hasn't taken it, is writing balance statements. And we talk about balance statements for conception. We talk about for birth, as well as parenting balance statements. So the question is this. When it comes to balance statements, if a client is struggling, how much can I guide the narrative of the flow? And this is really great because sometimes you might want to put your own reason, or like it can feel hard to understand something that feels like truth to somebody when from the outside you can see, I want to say maybe the flimsiness of it, but like, I mean, you can think of any of those examples. Your friend will be talking about their partner and they suck, the partner sucks. And you're like, it's so obvious to me, but to them, they're at a different place. So when you're supporting your clients, here's some of the things that I would say. The goal is to let them navigate through the process on their own because it feels like truth, and you want them to get to a new truth or to something that might be more evidence-based. But you can't rush that process. They have to go step by step. But what you can do is scaffold the parts. So with a balance statement, you want evidence for, evidence against, so that they can create maybe a baby step to get away from it. So one of the fears might be, so just so folks who haven't seen what the process looks like, you might have a client that's like, all women in my family have operative births. Like that's a bold statement. And so as they go through that process, you're like, okay, what's the evidence for this? Well, my sister and my mom had an operative birth. And so what you can do is you can ask questions. How did your grandmother's birth? Do you know the birth of like all the women who are in your family generationally? And so you can start asking those kinds of questions to guide them through. But they still will say all women in my family have to birth. So you might have to ask specifically, what were the births like for your aunts? Did you guys all birth at the same place? Because, if you've now got generations birthing at the same hospital, it takes so much work to change the culture of a hospital, as we know, because ACOG and the SOGC will release guidelines, and it takes over 10 years for those guidelines to come into play. Again, raise your hand if you are still seeing the resistance to the 6 centimeter mark being active labor. I am. And so it will take years before we're like, we stop engaging with under 6 centimeters being still considered active labor. And so you can ask them to find the evidence. So you can ask those kind of probing questions. I also have been asked, when I establish myself as the person for this family, I can help them find some statistical evidence. So I know when people have had a long tried to conceive journey, we're dealing with a very different labor experience. So if they had, say, multiple rounds of IVF, how they feel about their labor or the fact that their baby might actually come to fruition with this time is very, very different. So some of the pieces of information I've had my clients look for, so they might have this thing of, if it's not easy in, it won't be easy out, which hypnobirthing is they have some of their previous mantras really supported this, because the idea was easy in, easy out. But then as we had more and more reproductive assistance, you could see how some of these fears actually get turned up. So they're like, well, if it's easy in, easy out, what happens if it's hard in? Is it going to be hard out? And so you might support them in finding out what are the stats around IVF births and pelvic births versus IVF and operative births. And then you'd also have to factor in, though, that if people have IVF, they might have a more medicalized birth because they're feeling anxious about, like, sure, let's just have a C-section because I don't want to risk labor. So you're going to be like supporting them in, okay, I see you found this statistic that says, I don't know, I don't have it off the top of my head and I don't even want to guess, but that X percentage of IVF is this, and it's actually a little bit higher than other types of conception. You can explain some of that by saying, well, some people might opt to have an elective C-section because that felt the safest and best based on the choices and investment they've made to get pregnant. And we also know that there's a higher rate of anxiety and depression and a higher rate of postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety as well. So you can pull that information to actually support it so they can see a different landscape. But the goal is not to be like, are you sure? No, not everybody in your family has C-sections. You want to hear them and then say, like, okay. I mean, I do this all the time just with my friends when they're like, oh, nobody's going to fill in the blank. I'll be like, okay, did anybody call you? And they'll be like, well, yeah, 3 people did about it, but like no one else is going to help me. And you're like, okay, so who were you looking to? Okay, well, I was actually, my mom and my sister didn't help me. Okay, so your mom and your sister didn't help and you did have this support. So how can we, and that's how I can support clients in working with their balance statements. Again, drop anything in the chat if you have other questions, if any of you were the ones that sent these questions in. They're very great. I love this question. I'm so happy it came up. It hasn't come up actually in a while, so it's fun when these cycle back around. The question is this: when is it appropriate to discuss postpartum care if the client is struggling to connect with the pregnancy after many losses? And this is kind of a nice segue after the previous one. So if your client doesn't want to talk about postpartum care, we don't want to talk about postpartum care because there's lots of reasons why they might not want to, and we want to support the journey that they're laying out. You don't need a lot for the postpartum. So here's a system that I use because I've come up against this multiple times. I let my clients set the pace first and foremost. And then there's only a few things that you really need, some diapers, and then a car seat if they're not birthing at home, because you do have to have a car seat properly installed to leave a birth center or the hospital. So those are like your must-haves. So one of the things I do is I set up a care tree. So I say, great, we don't have to. Instead, can you make a list of 10 people will do anything that needs to be done once the baby arrives? So once we have that list, and we don't talk about like what they're doing or anything like that. I've actually asked like their top person. So if it's, say, they're like, oh, my best friend is at the top of my tree. I've created a template that I send to the best friend to say, like, this is how we're going to support the birthing person. When the baby comes, these things need to be done. So that might be like baby supplies, pick up sheets, make sure there's onesies, like whatever the thing is. And then that person like rolls out kind of like a TLC fast construction thing to have the items purchased and brought / set up in those first couple weeks. Again, very little is needed, especially if the birthing person is planning to feed from their body. And even if they don't know, the hospital kind of like will be that 24 to 40 hour buffer. And then that's lots of time for people to get the items needed. And so if your client doesn't want to prepare or talk about it, They don't have to do that. We all know that, like, well, it's better if they have a sleep plan, and there's preparation and knowledge that they need around lactation, and it's really hard to learn things once the baby's here. I get it. But for their mental health and to support them in, we don't know what kind of pressure those onesies in the drawer provide your clients. Like, that might feel like it would be even worse that if, this baby doesn't come to fruition, now I've got all this stuff, and like, people have made this effort, and like, there's a pressure to perform. So there are solutions to get stuff done real quick if needed, as far as getting those things into your house. And the reality is you don't need very much. So as long as they know they need a car seat to get, if they're not birthing at home, that's all. And then the rest is from their community that loves the heck out of them. And you can either be the go-between with the tree. You can, just take that over and send it over to say they're the best friend. Here's all the things that will need to be done. You need to be the project manager, whatever like that. You might build that in, that you do a little bit more postpartum support to help them get those systems set up. But there's lots of other options that doesn't require stressing your client out talking about it if they feel like they're not ready to connect to this baby and have it be a reality for them. Okay, this one is specifically about MSP certification. How long are the materials online, such as classes and quizzes, after they're finished? And they're always available. We do update the videos every year, so that if there is something with like new research or better, your old video will be replaced with a new one. But other than that, you always have access. That's the beauty of it. Okay, I like this question too, because I'm in this boat. So what do you do if you're the only doula in your area? As a result, you can't find a backup doula in case of an emergency. Would you just make this clear to your client and then offer something back should there be some reason you cannot attend the birth? Yeah, I mean, that's one option, is that you can put in it that you don't have a backup. But I would say find a backup. And there's lots of ways you can do that. So I'm doing this right now. I'm looking for folks that want to be doulas. And then I'm going to interview them to see if they're an alignment of people I would want to send my clients to. And then you can set up a creative way to get them trained. We have an affiliate program, so that that will cover a portion of it. You can talk to us if you want to get some doulas trained, and we can do a group rate for you. You can also do a split payment, maybe with a doula in your area, that you pay for a portion of it and then they work off that for you, or they might have the funds and they can just register for school. But find some people who want to be doulas and support them. It can also be really helpful if there's a local RMT or Chiro or something like that, because they can build that in as their continuing education. And they know that they might not have to have as many clients, but other wellness practitioners, they might be like, oh, that's great. Actually, I would love to pivot and add being a doula to my resume. And so that's a really great place to start, because they already have a foundation of client care. But you can build your own team. And I've done this a couple times. That's actually how Babel Mia started. I started training doulas to work with me because my practice grew really quickly, and I had a team of, 14 doulas, and then I moved over to an agency, and then we moved over to just exclusively training. But the MSP course was actually what we trained our team because they weren't doulas, and so that's actually how our baby route started. But I'm in an area here where there's a couple doulas that are on the edge of retiring. They're older, and I don't have a backup for my clients coming up. And so I'm going to train and have them come through MSP and work out that they would work off being my backup. So that's what I would recommend. I didn't see any new questions come up. We will be doing these, I think we do them every month or every other month, but they'll be posted in your groups, or if you have any questions. We have opened the doors for our next session. So registration is open as of today, and it's $400 off for the early bird. You use the code BIRTHBIRD. So for the student asking this question, now is the time. If somebody does want to jump in, you can buy with payment plans. We have lots of events coming up for the Hot and Brave Doula Club. It's a doula mentorship program. You can try out the club using the code TRY30, all cap locks, one word. And you can come to all the November events for free. We have really great ones about copywriting. We're doing a round table as well this month to explore birthwork and parenting in conflict and crisis with a focus on Gaza. So please be there. We have guest speakers coming, and it's just going to be open. Like, what can we do? What is happening? What does the landscape look like? So that's coming up as well. We have lots and lots happening. Thank you for being part of the Babel Mia community. I adore you all so much. These were really, really great questions. And don't forget to get yours in for the next one. If you have any, we'll be able to answer your training questions, doula skills questions, as well as any of your business questions. All right, y'all.